I always thought the ocean was a peaceful place. When I was younger, I used to take my son out fishing every summer, just the two of us sitting on the edge of the boat, watching the water ripple under the morning sun. Back then, he was small, enough to sit between my knees clutching the fishing rod with both hands, his little fingers trembling with excitement each time the line tugged. I used to think this is what happiness feels like. Quiet, simple, shared. But that was years ago. The man who stood across from me on the deck that day wasn't the boy I once knew. He was taller, broader, colder, and when he smiled at me, it wasn't warmth I saw. It was calculation. We were miles off the coast, the sea calm, the sky open. He'd invited me for a father-son day, as he called it. I should have known better. There'd been tension for months, ever since his mother passed, and he'd started asking questions about the inheritance, about the company, about why I hadn't stepped aside yet. I tried to tell him life isn't a race, that some things, like legacy, take time and patience. But patience wasn't something my son ever learned. He was pacing the deck, phone in hand, checking messages even as I cast my line. "You know, Dad," he said suddenly, "it's funny how life works. You build something for decades, and in the end, it only takes one mistake to lose it all." I glanced at him, feeling that slow, familiar sting of unease crawl up my chest. "What are you getting at?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He slipped his phone into his pocket, walked toward the cooler, and pulled out 2 bottles of beer. He handed me one, his smile still there, but now it looked rehearsed. "Just talking," he said. "You worked hard. I get it. But you've been holding on too long. You're tired. Everyone can see it," I laughed, trying to diffuse the tension. "That's the thing about age. You start hearing that from everyone." But I'm not quite done yet. He leaned against the railing, eyes drifting over the water. "Maybe you don't have to be. Maybe it's time to just let go." Something about the way he said that made my stomach twist. It was too casual, too smooth, like the words were hiding something sharp. The next few minutes felt strange. I could feel him watching me, waiting for something. The wind had picked up, and the waves tapped against the hull. I started to reel in my line. A small tug, maybe a fish. But before I could pull it in, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. "Coming closer, Dad," he said softly, almost kindly. "You know I love you, right?" I turned, half smiling, half cautious. "Of course, son. What kind of question?" Then it happened. A sudden shove. Hard, powerful, unexpected. My body lurched forward, the world spinning. And before I even realized what had happened, I was in the water. The cold hit me like a slap. The taste of salt filled my mouth. And when I surfaced, gasping, the boat was drifting a few feet away. My son stood at the edge, hands in his pockets. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't reaching for me. He was watching. And then he said it. His voice carried over the waves, steady and chilling. "Say hello to the sharks, old man." For a second I froze. I thought maybe I misheard him. Maybe this was some cruel joke. But then I saw his face. Calm, blank, detached. And that's when the truth settled in, like ice in my veins. My son wanted me dead. I shouted his name, kicked hard to stay afloat. "What the hell are you doing? Pull me up!" He didn't move, just watched. "You've had your time, Dad," he said. "You taught me everything. Business, power, control. But you never taught me how to share. So now, I'm taking what's mine." I tried to swim toward the boat, but the waves were rougher now. The current tugged at me, and panic clawed at my throat. I could see him reaching for something, not a rope, but the engine switch. He revved the motor, and the boat began to turn away. "Don't do this!" I shouted, my voice cracking. But the sound of the engine drowned me out. He was leaving me there, in open water. The boat sped off, leaving a white trail behind. The horizon swallowed it, and I was alone, just me, the sea, and a sky that suddenly felt too big. I floated there, heart hammering, lungs burning, salt stinging my eyes. I thought of every memory, every fishing trip, every time I'd wiped his tears as a boy. How does a father's love become this? Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time doesn't mean much when you're fighting to stay alive. I saw shadows move under the water. Fins. My blood turned to ice. I whispered, "No, not like this." And I started to swim, slowly, desperately, toward the faint line of land far in the distance. Each stroke was a battle. Every muscle screamed. But something inside me, something older than fear, refused to quit. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the sheer stubborn will of a man who refused to die by betrayal. When I finally saw the coastline, I could barely move. My body was shaking, my vision blurred. But as my feet touched sand, I collapsed and lay there, coughing, shivering, gasping for air. I survived. Barely. And as I lay there, watching the horizon, where the boat had vanished, a new thought took root, dark, cold, certain. If he thought I'd drown quietly, he didn't know me at all, because now I wasn't just a father. I was a man who'd been reborn, and I was going to make sure my son learned exactly what it means to betray someone who gave you everything. When I woke up, the world smelled of salt and smoke. My throat burned, my limbs ached, and the sound of waves crashing on rocks echoed through the fog in my head. I must have passed out on the beach after pulling myself ashore. My clothes were stiff with dried seawater, my skin raw from the sun. For a long while, I just lay there, staring at the sky. The blue stretched endlessly above me, calm, beautiful, and cruel. My mind kept replaying that moment, his voice, his eyes, the sound of the boat engine fading away. My own son had tried to kill me. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. I guess betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it grows in the very house you built. When I finally found the strength to stand, I realized I wasn't far from the old fishing docks on the outskirts of town. My memory of the place was decades old, a line of weathered cabins and rusted boats that barely clung to life. I stumbled down the shore until I found one of them still standing. A faded sign read, "Max Bait and Repair." Inside it smelled like oil, fish, and thyme. The man behind the counter nearly dropped his coffee when he saw me, soaked, bruised, and limping. "Good Lord, you look like you wrestled a shark," he said. I managed a weak grin. "You're not too far off. His name was Mac, an old fisherman who'd known me back when I used to bring my boy here. He didn't ask too many questions, which was good. I wasn't ready to answer any. He gave me a towel, some water, and a place to sit. "Boat trouble?" he asked eventually. I stared at the floor. "Something like that." He nodded slowly, as if he knew that wasn't the full story. "Happens more than you think. Water's got a way of bringing out the truth in people." I stayed silent, but in my head, the truth was already spreading like fire. When Mac left to fix a motor outside, I looked in the mirror behind the counter. I barely recognized the man staring back, skin pale, eyes sunken, beard ragged. But beneath that wreck of a face, something else had woken up. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't done yet. By nightfall, I'd borrowed a phone from Mac and called an old friend. Detective Harris, a retired cop who'd worked with me during my years in the shipping business. "You sound like hell," he said when he picked up. "I've been through worse," I replied. "Listen, I need a favor. Quiet one." When I told him what happened, there was silence on the line. Then, "You sure about this, old man?" "That's a heavy accusation." "I'm sure," I said. "He left me to die. I just need to know how deep he's gone." Harris sighed. "You always did have a talent for raising the wrong kind of hell. I'll see what I can dig up." Over the next few days, I stayed in the shadows. Slept in the small shack Mac offered, kept my head down, and tried to rebuild my strength. The news eventually reached me. My son had gone public with a statement saying I'd died in a tragic boating accident. There were photos of him at a memorial service, my face in black and white on a big screen, tears streaming down his cheeks. The performance was perfect. I nearly smashed the radio. The man I raised was parading my death for sympathy, and maybe even for profit. Harris called 3 days later. "You're not going to like this," he said. He's already moved in, took over your company, transferred assets into his name, even closed your personal accounts. Legally, you're a ghost now." I felt the weight of those words press into my chest. A ghost. That's what I was now. But then I smiled. A ghost has one advantage. No one sees him coming. "Can you get me proof?" I asked. Harris chuckled. "Already sent it to your email. I'll keep digging." That night I sat by the window, looking at the dark sea. Every wave seemed to whisper the same word. Revenge. Not out of hatred, but out of justice. The kind of justice only a betrayed father could understand. I started writing. Lists, memories, everything I knew about my son's weaknesses, the people he'd crossed, the deals he'd made, the secrets he thought I didn't know. And then I planned. Quietly, carefully. The first step was to make contact with the one person I trusted more than anyone, my late wife's lawyer, an old man named Raymond Wells. He'd been handling our estate for decades. If anyone could help me reclaim what was mine, it was him. I called his office from a payphone. "Raymond, it's me," I said, silence. Then a trembling whisper. "Good God, you're alive?" "Barely," I said. "But I need your help, and I need you to keep it quiet." He hesitated. "Your son. He's already claimed your estate. He said you left everything to him." My jaw tightened. "Then it's time we prove him wrong." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to purpose. Raymond agreed to meet me at a small diner outside the city. When he saw me walk in, his eyes went wide. "You look like hell," he said, shaking my hand. "Feels worse," I muttered. "Tell me everything." He pulled out a folder thick with documents, fake death certificates, transfer papers, signed affidavits. All clean, all legal, all forged with precision. "He had help," Raymond said. "Someone in your office, maybe your assistant. Whoever did this knew your entire system." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "He planned this." "For months," Raymond nodded grimly. "If you want to fight this, it's going to be a long road. But if you want to destroy him—" He paused, meeting my eyes. "That might be faster." A small smile crept across my face. "Tell me what you have in mind." I liked that phrase Raymond used. Faster. There's a certain mercy in cutting to the bone when someone's built their house on sand. I didn't want petty revenge. I wanted the truth to roll through his life like a tide, patient and inevitable, until everything he'd stacked up on lies came down. First, I had to make sure the world still believed I was gone. It's an odd power being presumed dead. People let their guards down. They say things they wouldn't when your eyes are watching. My son had already staged the funeral, the grave, the condolences. He'd written the script everyone read. So I stepped off the stage and let the actors continue, because actors can be sloppy when they think no one's looking. Raymond and I started with the paper trail. He'd seen enough wills, trusts, and dodgy estate maneuvers to smell smoke a mile away. The forgeries were clean true, almost elegant. Whoever had done them knew the language of law. That told me two things. One, my son had friends in the right places. Two, he'd underestimated one old man's stubbornness. I sat with Raymond over bad diner coffee and went line by line through the documents he'd pulled. Certain signatures looked machine-printed. Some stamps had slightly off-center impressions. Sloppiness, rare and precious when you're chasing a liar. Raymond made calls I couldn't. He pulled logins, traced emails, found the little mistakes people with secrets always make. A forwarded message left intact. A metadata tag that didn't get scrubbed. A timestamp that didn't match the narrative. The tiny things you miss when you move fast and breathe easy. While Raymond worked the legal end, I began the human work. I visited old clients, men and women who'd trusted us before the sale, people who still had my numbers scribbled on kitchen pads. I didn't confront them with, "He did this." I reminded them of how things used to be. "Remember when a table from us lasted a lifetime?" I'd ask. "Do you remember the way we used to answer our mistakes?" I wanted to reopen the memory of integrity. People respond to memory. They rally around it. That quiet chorus grew louder than I expected. Harris, the retired detective, dug into the technical side. He found a name, an IT consultant who'd helped my son's company modernize 2 years ago. A helpful fellow who'd had access to internal servers, file systems, and, crucially, to the process that could switch an executor from one name to another. A man who liked fast cars and the wrong kinds of friends? Harris called that man for a friendly chat, and the man's voice trembled when Harris mentioned evidence. Fear makes people clumsy. Clumsy people leave fingerprints. Meanwhile, I stayed dead. My son posted a few more photos, charitable appearances, tearful panels, a plaque with my name on it. I watched him perform grief like a Broadway role and felt nothing but a hard, clean resolve. I let him. People who pretend to mourn speak freely to the camera. They arrange press statements. They connect with donors. In his haste to be the grieving son who also runs the company, he made himself visible in places where liability loves to hide. Then came the first small turn. A supplier who'd cut a corner for my son began to talk. Not to me. The last thing I wanted was a rumor about an old man clawing back what he'd lost. They talked to Raymond. They talked to Harris. They talked to a woman at the bank who'd processed a weird wire the night the death certificate appeared. That wire, once traced, looked like a payment to an offshore firm set up to launder fees. One name led to another, and the trail brought us back to a single account, the one my son used to bankroll that flashy life. The same account he had used to pay the consultant. Once you find the account, you find the motives. Once you find the motives, you find the statements. Once the statements are in the right hands, accounts frozen, subpoenas filed, the stage begins to wobble. I watched from the sidelines, a ghost with a notebook, and felt a careful satisfaction. Not vindictive joy, no, just relief. The world was correcting itself. He called me one night. I didn't pick up. He left a message, voice thin with panic. Dad, they're saying there were fraudulent transfers. I don't know anything for sure. Raymond, please help me. The irony tasted bitter. I played the message 3 times and then deleted it. What good would my voice do? He wanted a handout, a quick fix. He had invited the storm. The next move was to hit him where the show must stop, the boardroom. My son was still fronting the company in press releases, but the board was restless. I'd quietly reminded a few longtime shareholders of the foundation we'd built, not with threats, but with facts they couldn't ignore. Warranty claims going unanswered, a spike in returns, employees leaving mid-contract. Their letters to the board began to resemble a mutiny. Corporate governance moves slowly until it doesn't. Once the board smelled blood, they moved faster than a desperate man can plead. But I wanted more than corporate collapse. I wanted to set the record straight in a way that people felt. So I did something people always underestimate. I used stories. I wrote letters to former apprentices, men who had learned at my elbow. I asked them to send testimonials about how we'd run things when pride was more important than profit. About the time we refused a large order because the materials weren't right. About how a return table had been replaced with our own money and a handwritten note. Their replies came back warm, human, impossible to argue with. I gave those letters to a reporter who'd once admired our craft. She sniffed out the rest like a hound and began to stitch together a piece that smelled like the truth. Public pressure and private subpoenas work in tandem. By the time the press ran the first story, founder's death shadowed by allegations of fraud, it was already too late for my son to spin the narrative. Investors who'd once lined up for his charisma began to ask for audits. Clients demanded proof of guarantees. The company's stock dipped, creditors whispered, and the man who had looked untouchable at the memorial found his phone blowing up with lawyers' names. He made one desperate move. He tried to flush me out. He filed for a probate court hearing, claiming that since I was alive, certain transfers should be considered void. It was bold, arrogant, dangerous. If the court publicized my resurrection, so to speak, the world could turn its scrutiny toward me and smear it as a ploy. But it also meant he had to step into a ring with a man who knew how to fight, without a roar. Raymond handled the legal front like an old general. We filed counterclaims. We produced the original wills, ones drafted years before, with witnesses who were still alive and remembered my handwriting. We showed bank statements and affidavits proving that certain signatures had been forged. Harris provided technical affidavits showing IP addresses and transfer logs that no reasonable person could deny. The courtroom smelled like old. paper and justice while the press watched. And the shareholders bit their nails. There's a peculiar sound. When a man watches everything he's built begin to crumble, the sound of confident laughter dying. I heard it through the TV in my little room at Mac's. The same man who'd screamed, "Say hello to the sharks," in the open sea now whispered defenses and threats to lawyers whose faces had once admired him. Desperation redefines dignity. But here's the quiet truth. The law is slow, but it's methodical. Truth accumulates like sand in a tide, small grains assembling until the whole shore changes. By the time the judge issued an emergency freeze on assets pending investigation, the world had turned from tragic loss to possible fraud. My son's image, polished and flawless at the memorial, had cracked in public view. People who'd once applauded his speeches now asked how they could have missed the rot beneath the shine. I could have shown up then, stormed a press conference, yelled about betrayal, made a spectacle. I considered it and then set the thought aside, like an unused tool. There's power in letting the legal machinery do what it's designed to do. There is a deeper satisfaction in watching someone brought down by his own choices rather than by your hand. The sea had taught me patience. The law did the rest. Only once, late at night, after a long day of paperwork and interviews, did I allow myself to think of what comes after. Hospitals, hearings, apologies, delivered in quiet paper envelopes. I wondered if a man like my son could ever stand upright again without the scaffolding of wealth and the easy applause that comes with it. I hoped, not out of malice, but because hope has a different shape when you're older. You begin to want things that last. Truth, repair, a measure of peace. The tide had come in on him. And as the ocean does, it took what it found loose and left the strong things still anchored. My life had been anchored in work, in teaching, in hands, calluses, and patience. That anchor held. I lay awake thinking of that morning on the boat, of his hand pushing me, of the cold water swallowing me. I thought of the fins I'd seen, the near certainty of death. That image, which once burned with anger, softened into something like gratitude. If he had wanted me gone, he'd only awakened an old man's clarity. He'd shown me who he truly was. And once you see a person fully seen, your path forward becomes simpler. The next morning, Raymond called with the latest, another subpoena, another witness coming forward. The consultant had quietly flipped. Money and fear have a way of loosening lips. Harris texted a photo of a bank log with timestamps that didn't match the son's public statements. The press was hungry, and the truth smelled like a feast. I walked down to the docks where Mac kept the small boats. The sea rolled in, patient and indifferent. I ran my hand through the water. Salt on my fingers, salt on my tongue. I had been given a second life, and I wasn't wasting it on vengeance for vengeance's sake. I wanted the story told right, the record set straight, and the memory of what we'd built to be mine again. Not stolen, not sold, not erased. Karma didn't need me to shove anyone into the water. It needed me to stand up, find the people who still honored the old ways, and stitch truth back into the seams of a lie. The tide would do the rest. When Raymond told me the consultant had flipped, I thought that would be the end of it. But the truth doesn't just expose people. It drags them through their own mess before it's done. My son wasn't finished yet. Desperation makes clever men reckless, and reckless men dangerous. That evening, Raymond slid a brown envelope across the diner table. Inside were photographs, security footage from my son's office, showing late-night visits from people who weren't supposed to be there. Men who dealt in shadows, not furniture. It hit me then. He wasn't just forging papers or moving money. He was trying to clean up the mess permanently. I remember sitting there, coffee gone cold, watching those grainy stills under the neon light. Raymond looked at me and said quietly, "You need protection," but I wasn't afraid. You stop being afraid after the sea has tried to eat you once. What I felt was disappointment, a deep, heavy ache that no courtroom could cure. The boy I'd raised was gone. What stood in his place was someone I didn't recognize. Harris, our retired detective friend, took that footage straight to his contacts. Within days, an investigation was quietly reopened, this time with serious eyes watching. Fraud was one thing. Conspiracy was another. They began tracing communications, pulling phone records, reviewing every business trip my son had taken in the months before my disappearance. And just like that, the walls began to close in. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet, invisible. I spent those nights walking by the docks, breathing the salt air, listening to the water slap against the hulls. It reminded me that everything moves in cycles, even betrayal. The tide goes out, and then it comes back stronger. A week later, a headline hit the morning paper. Founder's son under investigation for financial misconduct. The story didn't mention me, not yet, but the photos told enough. His face looked strained, thinner, eyes darting behind dark glasses. For the first time, the world wasn't applauding him. It was questioning him. The fallout was swift. Investors withdrew. Suppliers froze shipments. Even his friends, the kind that love you when you're winning, stopped taking his calls. And then, like clockwork, the sharks came for him. The very people he'd paid to handle problems started demanding more money. When greed eats its own, it doesn't chew politely. He couldn't keep up with the bribes, the blackmail, the endless damage control. Within 2 months, his empire looked like a cracked mirror, shiny in places, but broken beyond repair. Raymond and Harris wanted to push the final legal blow, but I told them to wait. I wanted him to feel what I had felt: isolation, regret, silence. I wanted him to wake up one morning realizing the one man he'd tried to erase was the only person who had ever stood in his corner. And then, one afternoon, it happened, a knock on my door at Mac's place. When I opened it, there he stood, my son. His hair was a mess, suit wrinkled, eyes hollow. He looked smaller. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. Then he whispered, "Dad." I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't answer. I just let the silence stretch, the way the sea does, before a storm breaks. He dropped to his knees right there on the porch, sobbing, hands shaking. He tried to explain, said he only wanted to secure the company, that he panicked when things went wrong, that it got out of hand. The words spilled out like poison he'd been holding too long. When he finally looked up, his voice broke. "I thought you were dead." And somehow that made it easier to justify everything. I stepped back and looked at him, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone. What remained was just a frightened man, a reflection of my own mistakes as a father. I could have yelled. I could have called the police right then, but instead I said quietly, "You pushed me into the sea, son, but you're the one who's been drowning ever since." He didn't speak, just cried harder. I turned away, leaving him kneeling there under the fading sun. That night, I couldn't sleep. Revenge didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like grief wearing armor. Raymond had been right all along. Sometimes karma doesn't need your hand. It just needs time, but the story wasn't done yet. Because the next morning, when the police cars pulled up to his house, he was gone, vanished. The letter was written in his familiar handwriting, sharp, slanted, impatient strokes. I held it for a long while before opening it. The paper smelled faintly of sea air, as if he'd written it near the water. It began simply, "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to understand why I became the man I did. You taught me strength, but I mistook strength for control. You taught me work, but I turned it into greed. I wanted to impress you, to prove I could build something as lasting as you did. I just didn't realize I was burning the bridge back to you in the process. If you're reading this, I've already turned myself in." I told them everything. Maybe that's my way of facing the sharks now. I'm sorry. I sat at the table reading those lines over and over. The anger I'd carried for months started to loosen, like a rope finally untied. Maybe it was age, or maybe I'd simply seen too much to keep hating my own blood. Raymond and Harris came by later that morning. They had already heard the news. My son had walked into the station just after dawn, surrendered himself with every document, file, and signature the investigators needed. The case was airtight. The empire he'd built on lies was dismantled before lunch. And me? I didn't go to court, didn't give interviews. I let the world do its talking. Because I wasn't seeking applause, I just wanted peace. Weeks later, I took my old boat back out for the first time since that day. The wood still creaked the same. The air still carried the same tang of salt. But I wasn't afraid of falling in anymore. I'd already survived worse. Out on the water, the horizon stretched endlessly. I tossed a fishing line and just sat there, listening to the quiet, to the heartbeat of the sea beneath me. I thought of my son, probably sitting in a cell somewhere, replaying every decision that led him there. And for the first time, I whispered a prayer for him, not for forgiveness, but for clarity. For the chance that maybe someday, when he's old and gray like me, he'll understand that money and power fade. But the weight of betrayal never does. Months turned into a year. The company was restructured under new leadership. Raymond took charge with Harris Consulting. They offered to name a foundation after me, but I refused. Just make sure no one else ends up like my boy, I told them. That'll be enough. One autumn morning, I received another letter. This one came from the correctional facility. Dad, I've been working in the prison workshop. They made me supervisor for carpentry. Guess I finally learned what real work feels like. There's a small boat I've been building in my free time. Nothing fancy, just something that floats. They said I can send it to you when it's done. I don't expect you to keep it. I just wanted you to know that this time I built something with my hands, not lies. Your son. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I smiled, a small, quiet smile that felt like exhaling years of bitterness. A few months later, a wooden model boat arrived at my door. The workmanship was rough, uneven, but beautiful in its imperfection. I placed it on my mantel, beside a photo of him as a boy holding his first fish, grinning from ear to ear. I never called him monster again. I never called him son either. I just called him human. And sometimes, when the sea wind howls through the trees at night, I hear the faint echo of his voice from that awful day. Say hello to the sharks. Only now it doesn't sound cruel. It sounds like a warning that saved me twice. Once from death, and once from becoming the kind of man I refused to be. Because in the end, the sea forgave me, and maybe, just maybe, I forgave him too. All that remained was a letter, addressed to me.